In the early 20th century, Antarctica was a mysterious and largely unexplored land, with many daring explorers setting out to conquer its frozen expanse. One of the most remarkable stories of survival, heroism, and leadership comes from Ernest Shackleton and his ill-fated Imperial Trans-Antarctic Expedition of 1914 to 1917. Shackleton, an Irish-born British explorer, was determined to lead an expedition to make the first-ever land crossing of the Antarctic continent. However, what began as a promising and well-funded expedition soon turned into one of the most legendary stories of survival against unimaginable odds. The voyage begins, setting sail for Antarctica. In August 1914, Shackleton's ship, Endurance, set sail from England for the Antarctic. The ship carried a crew of 27 men, including Shackleton himself, and was equipped with supplies for a year-long journey to cross the frozen continent. Their goal was to land on the Antarctic coast, march across the continent, and then reach the opposite side. Shackleton was known for his leadership skills, and his ability to inspire his crew was one of his strongest qualities. As they sailed south, however, war broke out in Europe, and the threat of the First World War loomed over the expedition. But Shackleton remained focused on the task at hand, making history by achieving the first-ever crossing of Antarctica. Shackleton and his crew were making progress toward their goal when disaster struck. In January 1915, the Endurance became trapped in a vast ice floe in the Weddell Sea, far from any land. The ship was caught in the pack ice, and despite months of waiting, it became clear that they would not be able to break free. The ship, aptly named Endurance, was now facing an unthinkable challenge. As the months passed, the ice gradually began to crush the ship's hull, and in October 1915, after months of desperate efforts to free the ship, Endurance was finally crushed by the ice. The crew was left stranded on the ice floes of Antarctica with no way of returning home. With the ship lost, Shackleton's immediate concern was the survival of his men. He ordered them to abandon their gear and camp on the ice. Despite the harsh conditions and isolation, Shackleton was determined to lead his men to safety. The crew had no shelter from the freezing temperatures, and they were surrounded by endless stretches of ice. Shackleton knew that they could not stay on the ice indefinitely. So, he made the bold decision to try and reach land, a move that would require navigating thousands of miles across dangerous and uncharted terrain. In March 1916, Shackleton and his men embarked on an incredible journey. The crew of Endurance had no choice but to drag their lifeboats across the ice, hoping to reach the nearest landmass, the South Georgia Islands, which were hundreds of miles away. They endured horrific conditions, freezing temperatures, starvation, and the constant threat of death. After months of moving across the ice, the crew reached the edge of the ice shelf. Shackleton, knowing that their only hope of survival was to get to the whaling station on South Georgia Island, decided to take a daring step. He and 5 of his men sailed in one of their lifeboats across the storm-tossed Southern Ocean, navigating in a 22-foot boat with little more than rudimentary charts and compass to guide them. This 800-mile voyage across some of the roughest seas on the planet remains one of the most extraordinary feats of navigation and endurance in the history of exploration. They faced towering waves, freezing temperatures, and the constant danger of the boat capsizing. After 16 days at sea, the lifeboat crew finally made it to the shores of South Georgia Island. However, their ordeal was far from over. South Georgia was a remote, rugged place with mountains that were impossible to cross in their exhausted condition. Shackleton and 2 others climbed over the mountains to reach the whaling station on the opposite side of the island. When they finally arrived at the station on May 20, 1916, they were weak and frostbitten but alive. The rescue mission. Shackleton wasted no time. He immediately organized a rescue mission to save the remaining men stranded on the ice. He returned to the whaling station, gathered a ship, and sailed back to the other side of South Georgia, where he and his crew had initially landed. There, he found a ship that could take him to the men stranded on the ice floes. The rescue was perilous, but Shackleton was relentless. Finally, in August 1916, after more than a year of hardship, Shackleton and his crew managed to rescue the final members of the Endurance expedition. All 27 men survived, despite the terrible odds and hardships they had faced. Legacy of Shackleton's leadership. The Shackleton expedition became a symbol of survival, leadership, and the indomitable will to persevere. Shackleton's refusal to abandon any of his men, despite the many obstacles, earned him a reputation as one of the greatest leaders in history. He kept the morale of his crew high even in the most dire circumstances, and his unshakable resolve is credited with the survival of his entire crew. Shackleton's story is not just one of physical endurance, but of the mental fortitude required to survive against all odds. His ability to adapt to an ever-changing and life-threatening environment, and his decision-making under extreme pressure, were critical to the expedition's ultimate success. Even though Shackleton never achieved his original goal of crossing Antarctica, his legacy as a leader and explorer has lived on. His story continues to inspire adventurers, leaders, and those who face seemingly insurmountable challenges. Shackleton's willingness to sacrifice for the well-being of his men, his extraordinary courage, and his tenacity in the face of overwhelming odds remains a testament to the human spirit's capacity for endurance.